TigerDetails.com. Jerit Roser here again with Julie Boudwin, trying to get into the details of some of this 2021 recruiting class that LSU is putting together. We talked a lot last week about some of the success in the defensive front seven, where half of the commitments currently are for this LSU class. Meanwhile, DBU only has one committed defensive back, and we kind of alluded to some other names to watch in the secondary last week, but just in passing. And so I think we anticipate some movement potentially over the next couple of weeks, but certainly over the next couple of months as the signing class really continues to take shape. Julie, who are some of these names that we need to keep an eye on potentially joining Kari G in this 2021 class for LSU?
Yeah, obviously, let's start in state with Sage Ryan, who's, I think, the guy that everyone feels most confident about just because of his ties with LSU and with Kevin and Trev Falk and that whole family dynamic. You've got Matthew Langlois, safety. He does not have an LSU offer, obviously, but they're definitely keeping tabs on him. And then when you go out of state, you've got guys like DeQuincy McKinstry, big cornerback out of Alabama. He's down between LSU, Alabama, Auburn. It's going to be hard to pull him out of Alabama, but if anybody could do it, it would be Corey Raymond, who's leading the way in that recruitment. You've got Andrew Makuba, the safety from Texas, who's really high on LSU as well. You've got Nathaniel Wiggins, who's going to be deciding on his birthday, August 28th. Corey Collier, who's deciding August 10th. But I think it's going to be coming down to LSU and Florida. So there's a lot of names still in play. LSU is in the mix for all of these guys. And as we see what's going to happen with visits, or visits going to open up or not, I think that's when we're going to really see some of these guys start to make their decisions.
Yeah, you touched on, I guess, a couple of interesting dynamics with a couple of these guys. Your take on Kool-Aid McKinstry is very similar to what I was saying a couple of weeks ago when Rivals asked the LSU, Auburn, and Alabama sites for some takes on him. And basically, I don't feel great about LSU's odds of getting him away from the two in-state programs, but if you're going to go play DB somewhere, DBU and the reigning national champions and the relationship that's there with Corey Raymond is, you have to give him at least an outside chance to potentially pull him away. And then the dynamics with the in-state guys, Matt has kind of all the makings of one of these in-state guys that ends up being a late addition to the class that LSU has been very heavily in contact with behind the scenes, as much as some of the schools that have offered him to this point. So he's someone that I know you and Jimmy have included in class projections and said to watch. And then Sage is just kind of chugging along. I think his recruitment may already be sewn up if he had had a chance to take some of the visits this summer that he would have hoped for. But LSU remains in great position with him, despite him still being uncommitted and having several other Power Fives in play.
Right. You know, and Matthew Langlois, I mean, what's not to like about the kid? I mean, I know you've interviewed him at for your other site, and he kind of, you know, it reminds me a little bit of the situations with like a Lloyd Cushenberry or Justin Jefferson, where these were guys that were added very late and came in and obviously had very important roles at LSU. Now, I'm not saying that's what's going to happen, but this is a guy that LSU really likes. And there's a good chance that if they would have been able to get him on campus this past summer, or if he would have had spring ball or spring film, he could have an offer in hand already. He may have been shut down already with that offer in hand. So this whole, you know, coronavirus, COVID-19 thing, it's just made for a very interesting recruitment for a lot of these guys. It's going to make for a very interesting fall to see what's going to happen. I mean, recruiting is very up and down, fluid to begin with, and then you throw in a pandemic like this, and it's really hard to predict anything at this point.
And all those delays come just a couple of years into the new early signing period that had moved all of recruiting up, and now we have these huge delays because of a pandemic. And talking to Matt this week, he said he doesn't know how long he can wait because the way things had started to go for a lot of these Power 5 programs recently, they're looking for guys to commit before the season, but
right.
Now everything's been so fluid and awkward that we're kind of waiting to see how things shape up for him and really all these guys. But we mentioned the one commitment at this point, Kari G. What is your expectation of about how many players they want in this class in those position groups on the back end of that defense. They have the one safety, but a lot of other names in play. How many would you expect LSU kind of aiming to possibly bring to Baton Rouge when it's all said and done?
Safety is going to be a really important part to this class. I mean, there's only one guy on board, but from what I'm understanding, they want, if they can get 3, 4, they would, if they have the room, they would go 4 if they had 4 guys. It's more realistic to think 2 or 3. You've got to think, you've got G on board already. You've got to think Sage Ryan, he'll be used as a little bit kind of, I mean, I don't want to call him the honey badger, but he'll be used all over the field. He'll be nickel, he'll be safety. He might even be returning some balls, You've got Makuba, who's a true safety. So, I mean, you get those guys on board, and then if you can get another corner, maybe 2 corners on board. I mean, I'm thinking 5 to 6 DBs total, a mixture of safeties and corners. Just the way that this class is going, though, the numbers are going to be very tight. I think we talked a little bit, Jimmy and I talked a little bit about that in our last prediction piece, where we actually picked 26 players. I mean, they have the 1 scholarship left over from last class. I think they're going to fill all 26 spots, and I still think it's going to be tight. And I think that's, you're seeing a little bit of them kind of being picky about not maybe offering this guy or that guy, just because you don't want a situation in the end where you have to boot somebody out. I mean, that's just not a good look.
Yeah, we saw kind of the progression of LSU's handling of the early signing period the last couple of years, where they brought far more guys into the class in terms of commitments last year early on than they had the year before, as they just kind of were better at being ahead. But then they had that interesting dance down the stretch where you saw some decommitments as they tried to predict who was going to potentially come their way late, and I think learned some lessons from that. And now they get to try to take a step forward during a pandemic. So another degree of difficulty as they continue to try and maneuver through the adjustments in recruiting and now COVID-19. So we'll see how it shakes out.
Yeah, it's going to be real interesting. I mean, as if recruiting wasn't interesting enough, this virus is making things a lot more interesting. And I think once we know whether the dead period is going to be extended or not, I think in the next 2 to 3 weeks we'll see a lot more guys announcing that they're either making their decisions or they're about to make their decisions. Because if it gets extended again, then a lot of these guys are just going to shut it down and make the decisions.
And a couple dates to keep in mind. Corey Collier at one point was planning to announce a decision August 10th. Nathaniel Wiggins later this month on August 28th. And so folks can kind of circle those and see if some commitments come, whether for LSU or some other big programs, and see how that affects that numbers game. And we'll have to keep an eye on how the NCAA rules affect maybe some of those decision dates.
Right, absolutely. It's going to be interesting. Everybody should just stay tuned.
It changes daily. Julie, thanks so much.
Thank you, Jerit. Have a good one.
You too. Again, she's Julie Boudwin. I'm Jerit Roser for TigerDetails.com. Thanks.
Thank you.